I'm Steven, and I left MAGA.
Hey, everybody. Rich coming to you here at Leaving MAGA at leavingmaga.org with the MeidasTouch Network. We have a brand new Leaving MAGA testimonial for you today. We are joined by Steve Francisci from the state of Virginia. Stephen, first off, thank you for being here with us. Really appreciate you making the time.
Good to be here.
So let's get right into it and take us through what some of the reasons were that attracted you to the MAGA movement, what you found alluring, what you found enticing about it.
Absolutely. I think it's important to name some context about childhood conditioning and programming early on. I grew up in New York City, Brooklyn, and Queens, and growing up, it was pretty tough up there. It was a tough place to grow up. Italian Americans, there was a lot of pride up there. Masculinity was pretty alpha male, toxic, I would say. There were some things I learned about race and identity that I absorbed as I was growing up in New York. One of the important things as well is I was often looking for approval from my dad. I love my dad. My dad passed away a couple of years ago, but I often followed in his footsteps. So if he was doing something, I found like, hey, that's what I need to do if I want to be successful, or if that's the way I need to be. So I spent a lot of time around folks like my dad. And then, of course, in New York, there's the mob and that mentality. And so there's this tough guy image that I found to be really kind of sexy. Like that was something that I felt like, hey, I want to be like that. And I started to lose a lot of emotions early on, like sadness and tears and crying. That kind of went out the window. And I started to turn into a pretty angry dude, So, but on top of that, I also experienced a lot of bullying. So it developed me into a person that was a pretty angry kid, So by the time I reached 18, I joined the military and I was off into the Navy. And so I spent 7 years in the Navy. And during that time, I had met, my first wife, and I was turning into a pretty self-centered dude. I was pretty toxic. I wasn't as much into politics, but when I was in the military, I wanted to have someone, a president that was looking out for us and looking out for our wallets. So I tended to gravitate towards what everyone was saying in the military. I wasn't that politically informed or savvy, so to speak. But I often listened to a lot of Fox News growing up. I often heard my dad listening to Fox News, and that was something that I would often repeat in talking points, but I really didn't even know what the hell I was talking about, to be honest with you. So, that's also important context. And then, 9/11 happened, and, I became, I was listening to rhetoric being told to me, and I became pretty Islamophobic. I was afraid of Muslims, and I was ready to go to war. And that was the mindset that I had. But the danger was when you're listening to the news and you're not being objective or critical about what you're hearing, you tend to absorb this stuff into your psyche, and it makes you a pretty angry dude. So psychologically, I was easily manipulated. And so when Trump came along in 2016, I was a pretty narcissistic guy. I was pretty self-centered. I lacked compassion for anyone. But something really important happened in 2015. I nearly died in a motorcycle crash. It was about that time I spent a lot of time trying to recover, trying to go back to work. I had a brain injury. But all that unresolved trauma from childhood and unquestioned beliefs about, what was right and what was wrong, it was just building up, and the accident just made everything worse. So needless to say, I was already into my second marriage at that time, and the marriage was falling apart. And 2016, I talk about this in my book that I just wrote, but in 2016, I was in a really dark place and I almost took my life. And I won't get into the details about that on here, but just to give you some context of how unhealthy I was mentally. And, when Trump was there, his demeanor and his approach and his tough guy look, it seemed familiar to me. It seemed like, yeah, I can resonate with that, and of course he was on The Apprentice and I was a business major and I was all about business. And I thought this guy, I wasn't too familiar with his past, but I thought he was the best thing since sliced bread at the time. I was like, yeah, this is what we need. Someone totally different from, he was the guy who just spoke what was on his mind. So yeah, I tended to follow that. It was familiar, and that was what attracted me to him. And so, yeah, so that's what kind of led me into following Trump and MAGA.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that there are times for lots of our leaders who are with us at Leaving MAGA where for some of us, I feel like we were ready-made for MAGA. And something that is quite common throughout all of the stories of people who have left and the stories we've told, which people can find at leavingmaga.org, is trauma. Mm-hmm. That someone endured some kind of trauma growing up, whether it was, in one case with one of our leaders, it was intergenerational racial trauma. With another, it was alcoholism. With another, it was a lady who was traumatized by her Christian nationalist church, which was her entree into MAGA. And I'm hearing you very candidly and vulnerably, which I appreciate that. And thank you for being that way in telling your story here, that I feel like that maybe you were ready-made for MAGA. And, talking about the trauma, the rage. I remember being in MAGA and I was always paranoid and angry and outraged about something. It was a constant dopamine hit of being addicted to rage. Mm-hmm. And that was my life for more than half a decade. So I appreciate you admitting that and saying what you're saying and being so open about it. So talk about what life was like for you in MAGA. What happened with the trauma, with the rage? How did you process and internalize the world as you were someone who became a member of this MAGA community?
Well, I would say as I, started to get into the movement, like I said, there was a lot of things that seemed to resonate with me at the time, and my emotional level of intelligence was kind of low. One more thing for context that I do want to mention is that in the early or mid 90s, I was, moving down into Virginia in the Bible Belt. I became a born again Christian. I became an evangelical Christian. So that also helped shape my beliefs and reasons for becoming more conservative and more right wing, so to speak, because the two kind of go hand in hand, and that also played a big part of it. And all of the Christian communities that I was in around and a part of were all supporting Donald Trump. And so I felt like this was the guy. And almost some of them were saying like, hey, he's the chosen one to lead this country. And I believed it. And I was like, yeah, you must be right, But again, constantly watching the news and Fox News and being rage baited, so to speak, it was really frustrating. And my mental health was just completely suffering. My relationships were falling apart. And the one thing I didn't want to let go of was the beliefs I had that our way was right and there was no other way. And that's tough. That's a really tough place to be. It's really an unhealthy place to be. I didn't have any critical thinking. So again, I would watch Trump and some of the cruelty and things he would do and making fun of disabled folks. And at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. So, watching him and how outspoken, how brash he was at the time, like I said, it just it really resonated watching his policies around the border and immigration. Again, at the time, these were things that I was starting to think like, yeah, this is what we need to do to keep this country great, And so he mocked people, and he did some pretty horrible things with women, and so. But I want to say that being involved in MAGA and following Trump and being a huge supporter of him, it gained. I had a community of people that a lot of them were like-minded, and people, I was able to connect with and talk about this stuff with them. So, but yeah, so things didn't really switch overnight. I started in therapy in 2016 or 2015 after my motorcycle accident, but I started the process of learning about emotions and becoming more aware. And I think that was also an integral part of me waking up. While I didn't really wake up right away, it's a slow process. And that is what kind of led me to where I was, to a point where my relationships were falling apart, and that's kind of where I got really stuck.
So I always I like to say in a lot of the media I do, in interviews and conversations, it took me an entire year to leave MAGA. So to paraphrase Ernest Hemingway, my epiphany happened gradually and then suddenly all at once. And you're talking about a process as well. So I relate to this very much, because even though we all go through this individually, there are some overlapping sentiments and emotions that I think occur for those who decide to leave. What were some of the reasons that compelled you to eventually say that MAGA does not comport with my values anymore, and then caused you to leave?
Yeah, so after Trump lost the second election, and the insurrection happened, and I was like, yeah, this is what we need to do to protect our democracy. But as I was starting to, I got remarried a third time, and as I was in that relationship and I was struggling again, it was around that time, around 2021, in that time frame, where I really started to get into trauma-informed therapy, where I really started to work on my emotions. And I started to understand how manipulation worked, what narcissism looked like, what control looked like. And these were all the things that I was. I was highly narcissistic. I was highly controlling. I could be very manipulative. And so as I started to see that more clearly in myself, especially being full of shame, toxic shame, I was starting to look outside of myself and to see where I would see it in others. And that was where I started to notice how I can see that behavior in people like Trump and other people. But it was like a slow awakening. It wasn't overnight. And slowly but surely, I would start to see the things that he was doing and some of the cruelty towards people. And I was like, something's just not right. And I just started to question. But again, it still was a bit of a slow awakening for me. I started to gain more compassion for myself. And what I found is that we really can't give to others what we can't really give to ourselves. And when I started to give myself more love and kindness and speak to myself more kindly, my heart just softened. And then I also went through a grieving process, and it wasn't just MAGA or Trump. It was everything that I ever thought I believed to be true. And that was my reckoning, so to speak. That was, some people would call it a spiritual awakening or midlife crisis. That was one of the darkest moments of my life, when I was literally, even after the suicide attempt and the motorcycle accident, this was the point where I was questioning everything from childhood all the way up to present day. And so like I said, that's when I just started to see Trump more clearly. Gaslighting, I started to understand what that was, because I was seeing things and then I was hearing rhetoric or talking points that didn't match the reality of what I was seeing. And that was important. That was important for me. And that is where I was like, wait a minute, like I really need to make some different choices here. And all the way up into the election, into him being elected in his third term, and Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris stepped in, I still was questioning. So it literally was that long for me. And I ended up voting for Kamala Harris. I was like, I cannot vote for someone that doesn't align with any sort of compassion or kindness, and someone that lacked integrity. How can I trust a leader that was lying to me and lying to others, and it was doing it without blinking? So that was really where the breaking point started for me in the end of 2024. And then after he got elected, and I started seeing these policies roll out, and I started hearing about Project 2025. I'm like, what is Project 2025? And this just roadmap and this web of Christian nationalism intertwined with everything they were trying to do in order to dismantle our democracy and to almost bring us into a theocracy. And they had Trump, and personally, I think Trump is more of an asset for a lot of other people behind him, but he's the one they chose, and he's the one who's doing all the damage and saying terrible things and getting us involved in conflicts where I don't feel we need to be in. So this was where it really all boiled down to, where I was like, I can't do this anymore.
That's really well said, Stephen. And, I hear a lot about, in your story, it's reminding me of anecdotes in my own MAGA life. And, I look the other way on the cruelty, on a lot of the abhorrent statements that he made about women and about Muslims, because I believe that the alternative was worse. And I thought that Hillary and the Democrats and Joe Biden and the Democrats were existential threats to our country. So I just defended the indefensible, and I was all in on MAGA. For me, it just became, I think, similar to your story. It became one lie, one betrayal too many. Mm-hmm. And it eventually just led us to say that this is not a movement that we can any longer support, or a man whom we can any longer follow and offer our devotion to. And you've got a memoir coming out. So talk a little bit about that and where people can find you online on your socials.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. In 2022, I started an Instagram community, and I became a mental health advocate, where I help support people who have been dealing with trauma their whole lives, and help people to start thinking more clearly. And that has grown to quite a decent following. And I'm on other places, but that's my main following. But over the last couple of years, I started focusing on writing my story. And I often think about how I was, and hence the title From A-Hole to All Right is the name of the book. And it's just what broke me open. And it's a life rewritten through pain, self-reflection, and conscious thinking and making better choices. So that actually came out today, and it's published, and it's available on Amazon. And I'm excited about it. And I have lots of people in the international community that are reading it. And some people have already read it early on and really appreciate the work that I'm doing. And I'm excited about it.
Well, I was one of the early readers, and I'm excited for you. And, let me congratulate you here. What are the names? What are the handles for your social media?
You can find me, the main one, Instagram, it's just Healing Roots On Up, or Stephen Francisci. If you search in any one of those on Instagram, you'll see my face pop right up at the top. I am on TikTok. I have a smaller following on there, and I have a smaller following on Facebook. And then, of course, on Threads, same handle. It's at Healing Roots On Up.
No, I so appreciate you being so honest with us, Stephen. I want to welcome you to our Leaving MAGA community. I also want to welcome you to the MeidasTouch network community. I encourage people to check out your social media. I look at your content all the time. It's inspirational. It's uplifting. And I'm so excited for your memoir coming out as well, because I know how hard you've been working on it. So I just wanted to acknowledge everything that you've done and just tell you how much I admire the fact that you've gone and come so far with what's happened to you in your life. We like to close every episode on a positive affirmation, and I hope you'll join me here. I'm Rich, and I left MAGA.
I'm Steven, and I left MAGA.
We're with Stephen Francisci here from the state of Virginia. Stephen, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Rich.
Hey, everybody, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, drop a comment down below, and make sure you follow Leaving MAGA at all of our socials and our newsletter, which you can sign up for at leavingmaga.org. As always, appreciate you watching. Thanks so much for your support.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.